Hi, I'm Tessa with Brain Rot News, here to serve you a steaming platter of underfunded, underperforming, underwhelming American students straight from the microwave of neoliberal policy decay. Hope you're hungry. Today we'll be talking about education, America's favorite bedtime story about equality, opportunity, and bootstraps that end with you drowning in student debt. Now, in any remotely functional country, education would be a sacred institution. Universal access to quality schooling is a no-brainer. Equity across race, class, and zip code should be the goal. In a sane nation, you would have robust public funding so schools don't have to crowdfund basic supplies on GoFundMe like they're war orphans selling matchsticks, yet here we are, with books getting banned faster than semi-automatic rifles, teachers being vilified for saying slavery happened, and the Department of Education being stripped down like a copper wire heap behind an abandoned Walmart. Under a reasonable ideology, education is a public good, a civil right, and a ticket to something better. Under Trump 2.0, it is a threat to the regime. Since he was sworn in on January 20th, 2025, the Trump administration, now featuring a rotating cast of Christian nationalists, think tank goblins, and rejected school board candidates with vendettas, has been gutting the Department of Education like fish at a MAGA cookout as part of Project 2025's Heritage Foundation wet nightmare strategy to dismantle what little federal oversight we had left. In this episode, we'll dive into the sludge pit of broken chalkboards and shattered futures. We'll be going over the restructuring of the Department of Education to better reflect the values of apartheid and fundamentalism, the shifting of K-12 priorities from teaching kids things to teaching kids not to question authority, the student loan reforms, which is more like a euphemism for replacing debt relief with financial waterboarding, and the federal budget cuts that are pulling the foundational supports from the structure of education, leaving it unstable and prone to collapse, while the GOP is actively handing out crowbars. So if you thought school was rough before, just wait until we peel back the layers of this anti-intellectual onion. It's time to watch the American education system get a lobotomy with a Trump-branded ice pick.
Brain brought the news.
Part 1. How to destroy education without getting your hands dirty. Let's start with the Trump administration, where every cabinet position is seen not as a responsibility, but as a demolition opportunity, and education is just another commie plot to make kids question their God-given right to ignorance. Since returning to power, the Trump regime has made it crystal clear. The federal government's role in education is about as welcome as a drag queen at a Moms for Liberty meeting. Leading the charge is an executive order titled Improving Education Outcomes by Empowering Parents, States, and Communities, a name that sounds like it was workshopped by a political marketing firm trying to hit every buzzword. The executive order tells the Secretary of Education to do everything short of lighting the building on fire to dismantle the Department of Education and hand the keys over to the states. Because if history has taught us anything, it's that decentralization in a country this unequal is a great way to guarantee wildly different standards, widespread discrimination, and a few states deciding Rosa Parks was a crisis actor. The justification is that the Department of Education does not educate students directly. This is like saying the EPA doesn't clean up oil spills with its own hands. It's a willful misunderstanding of federal oversight, civil rights enforcement, and equity. But who needs nuance when you've got grievance policies and a base that thinks CRT is a chemical weapon? Secretary of Education Linda McMahon, who you might remember from pro wrestling and a shady small business loan scheme, is now starring in her new role as America's head of book burnings. She called the order historic, which is technically true in the same way the Black Plague was historic. McMahon insists that education is a state responsibility, as though the federal government never had to step in when states were too busy segregating schools, underfunding Black communities, or banning science. Her idea of empowering parents sounds a lot like giving free rein to the loudest voices determined to empty library shelves and slash school budgets. It's not just executive orders either, they've got legislation cocked and loaded as well. House Bill 899 is basically a political suicide note for public education, proposing the department's termination by 2026. Representative Thomas Massie, who reintroduced the bill, has said that kids should be educated based on local needs, as though local needs have never included racial justice, gender equity, or climate science. Then there's Senator Mike Rounds and his Returning Education to Our States Act. The bill proposes scattering federal education programs to the winds, suggesting shifts like sending IDEA over to Health and Human Services and pushing student loans onto the Treasury or even the Small Business Administration. It's a plan so randomly assembled it feels less like policy and more like throwing darts at a government organizational chart. Of course, turning federal funds into state block grants is a classic conservative bait and switch switch. Local control sounds nice until you realize it often means poor states get poorer, disabled kids get left behind, and brown students get erased entirely. It's like saying, sure, you can have dinner, and then handing people a raw potato and a stick. Mike Rounds isn't the only one, though. The administration has also floated plans to shift the student loan portfolio to the Treasury or SBA, agencies that know as much about education as Betsy DeVos knows about public schools. Managing income-driven repayment plans and forgiveness programs is already a bureaucratic hellscape. Giving that job to the SBA is like asking your mechanic to perform brain surgery. And as we all know, the quickest way to education reform is through mass layoffs. Over 1,300 employees have been purged from the Department of Education, including hundreds from the Office for Civil Rights and Federal Student Aid. Some were fired while others were quietly sidelined under Trump's war on diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, because God forbid a black trans kid gets the same education as a white kid named Gunner. The Office for Civil Rights, already operating on duct tape and overtime, has now been turned into a ghost office. And when there's no one left to enforce federal protections, you're opening the door for discrimination, systemic abuse, and unchecked inequality, which, to be fair, is probably their plan. Meanwhile, the FSA staff cuts threaten to further destabilize an already dysfunctional student aid system. Millions of students rely on these programs to survive, but with fewer staff and less oversight, expect more errors, more delays, and less people going to college. So what does all this mean? It means the Trump administration isn't just reforming education, it's trying to kill it, bury it in a shallow grave, and gaslight the country into thinking the funeral is a victory celebration. Part 2. The War on Children. In their holy crusade to rescue America's innocent children from the scourge of empathy and historical context, the administration has pivoted K-12 education towards what they call ending radical indoctrination, because apparently teaching that racism existed or that gender is not a binary determined by God is now considered Marxist grooming. At the center of this dystopian rebranding is an executive order that reads like it was written by Tucker Carlson after a head injury. It bans federal funding for any program that acknowledges the existence of trans kids, systemic racism, or historical accountability, because truth is federally mandated ignorance. The order declares that schools may not subsidize the social transition of minor students. It's the educational equivalent of don't ask, don't tell, but with more lawsuits and fewer vowels in the word woke. They even list discriminatory equity ideology as a threat. Yeah, you heard that right. Apparently, the real discrimination is equity. According to this logic, acknowledging past injustices in itself is an injustice. It's the same tired cry of every mediocre white guy who got passed over for a job by someone who actually had credentials. This weaponized fragility has a chilling effect on classrooms. Teachers are now afraid to talk about race, gender, or the idea that American history didn't start with George Washington and end with Ronald Reagan. Imagine trying to teach To Kill a Mockingbird without mentioning racism, or explaining World War II without discussing Nazis. The Office for Civil Rights has even issued a Dear Colleague letter that makes it crystal clear. If you use race, color, or national origin as a basis for anything, even efforts to promote diversity, you are now violating Title VI. This is civil rights erosion, and it doesn't stop at identity or history. It drills into special education too. In their budget wish list, the administration proposes gutting the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the law that ensures students with disabilities have rights and services in public schools. How, do you ask? By converting federal funding into a single block grant with as much oversight as a Florida man running a backyard alligator sanctuary. They say this will cut bureaucracy and empower states. In reality, it'll empower states to do whatever the hell they want, including slashing funding, cutting services, and throwing individualized education plans into the trash. Project 2025, the Heritage Foundation's monster, wants to take it even further by bypassing states altogether to send money directly to local districts and parents through education savings accounts. I guess caring about children with disabilities means handing parents a prepaid debit card and telling them good luck finding a private school that won't kick your kid out for needing a wheelchair ramp. And if you're wondering what happens to public schools in this brave new voucherized hellscape, they wither. Public education becomes a dumping ground for the poor, disabled, and marginalized, while wealthier families funnel public dollars into unregulated private schools that teach that dinosaurs rode the ark and that slavery was a form of job training. Then we get to the main course of this regressive buffet: common sense school discipline. In an executive order that might as well have been named Fuck Brown Kids, the administration claims that under Biden, schools cared too much about racial equity quotas and not enough about student safety. The idea was just that schools should maybe not suspend black kids 4 times more than white kids for the same exact behavior, but that's a little too too woke. So now we're going back to the good old days of zero tolerance, except, of course, for systemic racism. They're scrapping restorative justice, tossing equity into a wood chipper, and calling it common sense. Because if there is one thing this administration wants, it's to keep the school-to-prison pipeline flowing faster than an oil spill in a red state. And finally, no Trump-era initiative would be complete without a McCarthyist panic about foreign influence in higher education. Under the guise of reforming accreditation, they want to strip universities of their independence, gut DEI programs, and create a Hunger Games of accreditors where only those who ignore race and gender and worship job placement stats survive. Don't let the suit and tie framing fool you. This is about turning universities into trade schools with prayer rooms. If you mention Palestine, you're anti-American. If you study queer theory, you're a foreign propagandist. And if you question capitalism, you get put on a list. The goal is to defund critical thinking, delegitimize diversity, and drown the public education system in a vat of nationalist Kool-Aid. So next time you hear someone say school choice or parental rights, just remember it is really about control, and the choice they want is between silence and subservience. Part 3. Death sentence. What could be more American than getting an education and then spending the rest of your adult life being hunted by Sally Mae like she's the IRS with a grudge and a chainsaw? The Trump administration, ever the champion of the working class, as long as that class is white, male, and on Fox News, has now set its sights on reforming the federal student loan system, and by reform, they mean replacing a leaky lifeboat with an anchor. At the heart of this budgetary bloodletting is a plan by House Republicans to gut the Biden administration's SAVE plan and replace it with something called the Repayment Assistance Plan, or RAP. A better acronym would be SOO for straight out of options. So what does RAP do? Well, it's like income-driven repayment with a lobotomy. Payments are now pegged to your entire adjusted gross income because, God forbid, we let you eat or pay rent before skimming off your wages. If you make between $10,000 and $20,000 a year, you pay 1%. If you make over $100,000, you pay 10%. And if you make under $10,000, you still owe $10 a month because fuck you, that's why. RAP does include an interest waiver and a nice little $50 per month principal reduction, courtesy of the government. But don't let that fool you. This is a 30-year indentured servitude contract with a smiley face sticker on it. It's financial hospice care. It does not cure the debt. It just makes it slightly more comfortable while it slowly kills you. If you thought the Biden administration's SAVE plan was flawed but humane, offering $0 monthly payments for the poorest borrowers and forgiving small loans in as little as 10 years, well, tough, that's gone. Canceled like a drag show in Florida. Under RAP, low-income borrowers are more likely to default than to ever reach forgiveness. Because when you're living on food stamps and getting hounded over $10 a month, the last thing on your mind is a rest of your life repayment plan. The Republicans are also pulling out their scissors and going full Edward student loan hands on subsidized federal loans and Grad Plus loans. Starting in July 2026, there will be no more subsidized loans for undergraduates. So now when you borrow for college, the interest starts accruing while you're still learning how to microwave ramen. That's like charging rent on a house you haven't moved into yet. Predatory? Maybe. Profitable? Absolutely. As for grad students, you can kiss the Grad Plus loans goodbye too. Better hope your dreams of becoming a doctor, lawyer, or social worker include a trust fund. If not, well, the Heritage Foundation suggests welding school. Don't be too quick to think this is just about punishing students. It's also about punishing schools. That's right, colleges whose students fail to repay loans would be forced to refund the government. Sounds fine in theory to make institutions accountable. In practice, though, this could turn colleges into Ivy League hedge funds that only admit applicants with 800 credit scores and a LinkedIn profile that was made in the womb. That means less access for low-income, first-generation, or marginalized students who might need support the most. Welcome to admissions by FICO. One of the worst parts is their creative approach to public service loan forgiveness, is that the Trump administration wants to bar borrowers who work for nonprofits with a substantial illegal purpose, which sounds reasonable until you realize that what the Trump administration considers illegal could include abortion rights groups, harm reduction organizations, immigrant advocacy centers, or any nonprofit that makes Stephen Miller's nose twitch. The ADA is over here politely asking the Department of Education to stop compounding interest like it's trying to win a math contest. The administration is focused on right-sizing Title IV regulations, which is code for let's make college unaffordable again. Even the negotiated rulemaking process, a supposedly collaborative way to fix federal aid policy, is now just a decorative ritual, like democracy in Hungary. You can sit at the table, sure, but don't expect the menu to change. So what's the big picture? It is a system that asks young people to mortgage their futures just to afford basic education. Then it extends their debt into middle age while removing safety nets, punishing the poorest borrowers, cutting aid, and turning universities into pay-to-play credential mills, all while offering the illusion of financial freedom and accountability. Because in Trump's America, debt is a virtue, as long as it's not his. Part 4. Debt collectors assemble. Just when you thought it was safe to check your mailbox again, the U.S. government kicks in your door with a ski mask and says, "Remember that education you bought in 2009? We want the money, now." As of May 5th, 2025, the Department of Education has officially resumed collections on defaulted federal student loans because economic recovery, I guess, is wage garnishment. So let's back up. Since March 2020, collections were paused in a rare act of government mercy due to the COVID-19 pandemic that killed over 1 million Americans, wiped out jobs, and cratered bank accounts. But hey, it's 2025 now, and the vibes are immaculate. So break out the Treasury Offset Program, which lets Uncle Sam snatch your tax refund like a magician stealing a watch, and dust off administrative wage garnishment. Because what's better than working overtime and still not being able to pay your rent? Guarantee agencies are back too, chasing borrowers with loans under the FFEL program like it's Jingle All the Way, and the toy is your remaining dignity. This affects 5.3 million borrowers currently in default, with millions more teetering on the brink like extras in a 2008 foreclosure documentary. According to the Department of Education, only 38% of borrowers are actually current on their loans. That's not a system working, that's a funeral procession with a spreadsheet. The Trump administration says this is about protecting the taxpayer, because if there is one thing Donald Trump has always done, it's fiercely defended taxpayers, except for all that money he spends on his own golf courses. They've framed this as a matter of personal responsibility, which sure, makes sense if we're talking about like a yacht or a cocaine habit, but this is education. This is people trying to get trained to become nurses and teachers, jobs that barely pay enough to afford the gas it takes to get to them. We're not just resuming payments, we're resuming collections. That's the financial equivalent of skipping foreplay and going straight to asset seizure, wage garnishments, tax refund theft, and Social Security offsets for borrowers over 65. It is a state-sponsored mugging. The Biden-era SAVE plan would have offered many borrowers lower payments, even $0 per month for the lowest earners, but with that plan now caught in legal limbo and Trump's new RAP plan on the horizon, borrowers are left in a bureaucratic purgatory. It's like being stuck between a guillotine and a wood chipper. The Department of Education says borrowers should contact their servicers to explore their options. But for many, that means spending hours on hold only to be offered a repayment plan that leaves them choosing between groceries and loan payments. For those already in default, rehabilitation might as well mean begging for your financial life on a Zoom call with a collection agent in a soul-devouring headset. Advocates are sounding the alarm that all this policy whiplash is creating a confused, exhausted borrower class. People don't know what they owe, to whom, or why their tax refund suddenly vanished. It's financial gaslighting at scale. If you take millions of people already struggling to survive and start siphoning off their wages, consumer spending drops, economic recovery stalls, and the debt collecting industry thrives. Pop champagne, boys, poverty is profitable again. It's an act of physical sadism. But don't worry, if you're a billionaire, your taxes are still fine. If you're a mega corporation, your subsidies are secure. And if you are a nurse who missed a few payments during a pandemic and thought the government might show you some mercy, surprise! Sallie Mae's got a garnishment order and a Louisville slugger. Part 5. Who actually needs schools anyways? In the latest installment of America's War on Its Own Future, the Trump administration has unveiled its fiscal year 2026 budget proposal, which includes a 15.3% guillotine drop on the Department of Education's budget, a cool $12 billion slashed off the top. Secretary of Education Linda McMahon calls this budget responsibly winding down the agency. Translation: we are executing a controlled demolition, but calling it a gentle transition. First on the chopping block is the Federal Work-Study Program, because why let poor students work their way through college when we could just fast-track them to low-wage debt? The administration plans to yank $980 million, claiming it's reform, which is rich coming from people who think equity is a brand of golf club. Then comes the Supplemental Education Opportunity Grant, which assists undergraduates with exceptional financial need, and would be entirely eliminated with a cut of $910 million, because apparently helping the poorest students is inflationary and supports radical leftist ideology. Nothing says Antifa like community college. They're also taking a crowbar to TRIO and Gear Up, programs that help disadvantaged kids get into college. They claim they're outdated and unnecessary because apparently access to higher education is now easy, especially if you have rich parents, legacy admission, and a yacht named Reaganomics. Just in case you thought there might still be a department dedicated to protecting student rights, they're slashing the Office for Civil Rights by 35% because it's promoting DEI and radical transgender ideology, which means it's just enforcing basic anti-discrimination laws. And we can't have that. Meanwhile, the Fund for Improvement of Post-Secondary Education is losing $195 million with accusations that colleges are spending the money on ideologies instead of students. The Strengthening Institutions program, designed to support low-income colleges, is getting the let the market sort it out treatment, meaning it's being cut entirely. And just to put a racist cherry on top, Howard University, a cornerstone of Black excellence, is getting $64 million lopped off like it's a corporate tax write-off. So what does all this mean? If you're poor, disabled, first generation, a student of color, or just not a member of Mar-a-Lago, good luck. It's a philosophy that posits that education is a privilege, not a right, that helping the vulnerable is ideological overreach, and that public education should be gutted, privatized, and eventually replaced with a charter school lottery and a prayer. Trump's education budget also proposes a shiny new toy, the K-12 Simplified Funding Program, a $2 billion block grant that supposedly streamlines education funding by eliminating 18 existing programs and cutting $4.5 billion in the process. It's the bureaucratic version of saying, we put all the fire extinguishers in one closet and locked the door. You're welcome. They pinky promise Title I and IDEA will be preserved, which is like setting a building on fire and saying the lobby is untouched. Funding for low-income schools and students with disabilities may be technically level, but the need far outpaces the budget, and Trump's team knows it, and handing it to the HHS shows they do not care. It is a blueprint for sabotage, a declaration that education is too woke to fund, that civil rights are a nuisance, and that the fewer students get educated, the easier it is to sell fascism with a straight face. The message is clear. If you want to learn, do it on your own dime. If you want help, good luck. And if you expect the federal government to care about equity, fairness, or opportunity, then buddy, you've got the wrong empire. Part 6. Body slamming education. Secretary of Education Linda McMahon, the woman I've mentioned throughout this episode, a woman of wrestling dynasty fame, is now body-slamming federal education policy with the same grace she once used to market The Undertaker to children. Her guiding philosophy is that education should be a states' rights issue, which is always fun, because when we hear states' rights, it's usually followed by someone trying to ban books, rewrite history, or criminalize empathy. McMahon's big mission is empowering parents, which sounds great until you realize it mostly means empowering parents to pull their kids out of public school and funnel taxpayer money into private religious academies that teach dinosaurs were a liberal hoax. She's all in on school choice, which in practice means gutting public schools until the only choices left are Bible camp or charter prep for crypto bros. She's also a huge fan of career and technical education, which might have sounded noble if it weren't part of a broader plan to stop funding higher education altogether and replace it with YouTube welding tutorials. Don't dream big, just learn HVAC and pray there is still a climate to condition. McMahon is also waging war against political indoctrination, targeting critical race theory and what she calls gender ideology. That's right, reading, math, and true history are back on the menu, and by true history, they apparently mean a history where every chapter ends with fireworks, carefully omitting the footnotes about who got burned. She's not just talking either, she's overseeing the shutdown of the Department of Education itself. The Secretary of Education is slowly assassinating her own department. If you're wondering what kind of dystopia hires someone to destroy the thing they run, remember, Trump's education pick made Betsy DeVos seem moderate. If this fiscal year 2026 budget felt like a funeral, that's by design. Critics, of course, are not thrilled. The National Education Association and the American Federation of Teachers have made it clear. Putting McMahon in charge of education is like asking a demolition crew to redecorate your house. Her business background, running a company where plot lines involve chairs to the face, isn't exactly the resume you'd expect for someone in charge of kindergarten to college. Teachers fear that her anti-indoctrination campaign is really an anti-education campaign, one that will rip away honest discussions about race, gender, and social inequality. If McMahon gets her way, students will graduate knowing how to recite the Pledge of Allegiance in cursive, but with no idea what the civil rights movement was or how consent works. By shrinking federal oversight, she's setting the stage for massive funding cuts, no accountability, and the steady erosion of protections for students with disabilities, LGBTQ, youth, and anyone else whose parents don't own a yacht. Part 7. People are screaming, but no one is listening. Not everyone is cheering while Linda McMahon pile drives the Department of Education into oblivion. A collection of think tanks, civil rights groups, and every teacher not suffering from a traumatic brain injury has been raising the alarm about what this Trump-era scorched earth education policy will mean in practice. The Century Foundation, an institution with the audacity to believe children should be educated, warns that dismantling the Department of Education could endanger immigrant students with disabilities and lead to a rollback in school discipline policies that historically have treated Black black and brown kids like miniature felons. The Center for American Progress is practically sending up smoke signals. They've blasted the administration's war on Head Start, called out the gutting of civil rights protections, and repeatedly condemned the obsession with private school vouchers, which are basically a government-funded golden ticket to Jesus camp. They are pushing for more public education funding and racial equity, an agenda that, under the current regime, reads like Marxist fan fiction. Then there are the big dogs, the AFT and NEA, the teachers' unions who've had to go to battle against two non-consecutive education secretaries with zero education experience, unless you count dodging questions at Senate confirmation hearings. Both unions say the Trump-McMahon demolition plan is a direct assault on poor students, disabled students, and anyone who needs financial aid. They've called out the con job of school choice, which sounds like parental empowerment until you realize it's just a way to abandon public schools and funnel cash into unregulated private ones that teach that the earth is 6,000 years old and Harriet Tubman was just a troublemaker. They've also ripped into the administration's obsession with erasing diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, calling it what it is, an ideological purge, the kind of purge where students are told to shut up about racism and gender identity because acknowledging those things might endanger white fragility. Enter the ACLU, declaring that the Trump education agenda puts the civil rights of millions at risk. They're not being dramatic. OCR, the Office for Civil Rights, is being gutted, making it harder to investigate discrimination complaints, and when there's no one left to enforce equity in schools, justice is never served. Add to that the rollback of Obama-era guidance on school discipline, and you've got a recipe for more suspensions, more expulsions, and a school-to-prison pipeline greased with bureaucratic indifference. The most vulnerable students, those of color, those with disabilities, LGBTQ students, and multilingual learners are all at heightened risk, and the administration's answer is to let the states handle it, which sounds fine if you ignore the entire history of Jim Crow, segregation, and every moment when states decided marginalized people could wait until the next generation for basic rights. This is a structural dismemberment of federal responsibility for equity and education. It's the ideology of privatize, decentralize, and demonize, repackaged as opportunity, but actually just abandonment wrapped in a stars and stripes napkin. Part 8. They are counting on us to do nothing. So here we are, staring into the smoldering crater where the Department of Education used to be, wondering if the Constitution now comes with a do-it-yourself appendix and a coupon for charter school vouchers. This is not just right-wing bureaucratic tinkering. This is a political arson job. They are not reforming the Department of Education. They are strangling it, gutting civil rights protections, slashing financial aid, fucking over people with disabilities, burning DEI to the ground, and calling it fiscal responsibility. They want to break the public education system so that when it inevitably fails, they can point and say, see, government doesn't work. Then they hand you a Bible and a tax credit for homeschooling your kids via YouTube. This is not normal or temporary. This is a transformation. The worst part is that it's working. They are banking on your silence. They are counting on your exhaustion, and they are gambling that the sheer absurdity of it all will numb you into accepting it, just like we accepted kids learning active shooter drills alongside multiplication tables. But here's the part they didn't account for. All of us. You are not powerless in this. You are not just a spectator to a slow motion collapse. You can fight back, and you need to. Start local, start loud, and start now. Educate yourself. Not in the way they want you to with state-approved textbooks and sanitized timelines, but with real reporting, grassroots organizations, teachers' unions, student-led movements, and nonprofits that still give a damn. If you don't know the details, they win by default. Talk to your representatives, the grifting sociopaths in Congress, but also your state legislators and school board members. Call them, email them, and flood their inboxes until they are forced to care. Share your story. Tell them what these cuts would mean for your kids' schools, your community, and your future. Show up to town halls, school board meetings, and public forums. Be the person asking the uncomfortable questions and the loud voice in the back row that makes someone say who let them in. Submit public comments. These often overlooked bureaucratic processes actually matter. They go on record. They count. Every proposed regulation gives you a window to yell back politely, legally, and with receipts. Join something, anything, unions, PTAs, advocacy groups, and protest networks. Pick one, show up, and help organize. There is power in numbers, and right now, they are betting you'll never find each other. Talk to people, your friends, your neighbors, and your co-workers. Start a conversation or even a fight. The only thing scarier to authoritarians than funding equity is people talking about it over coffee. Use your voice, social media, letters to the editor, podcast, your stand-up set, or your Substack newsletter about sourdough starters and late-stage capitalism. Whatever megaphone you have got, use it. Volunteer volunteer, get inside the schools and see what they're up against. Advocate for local funding, support struggling students, and listen to teachers and children. Do not just yell about policy. Be part of the resistance on the ground, and above it all, do not let this become background noise. This is not just a difference in education philosophy. It is a targeted, strategic, and brutal dismantling of public education as a public good. It is meant to make us dumber, more desperate, and easier to control. It is designed to make you stop caring. Don't care louder, because if we do not fight now, the future will not just be illiterate, it will be obedient, and that is exactly what they want. Remember, the fight for education is the fight for everything else. If they win this one, they win the whole damn game. That's all for Brain Rat News. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe before we're all too intellectually defunded to tell the difference between a policy memo and a conspiracy meme.